I used to think I was a good man. I paid the bills on time, I dressed well, I held my head high in public. I had friends who praised me, co-workers who envied me, and a wife who came home to me every night. By all appearances, I had everything that defined success. A solid job in law, a beautiful home, and a woman many men admired from afar. But appearances lie. I've learned that being a good man isn't about your resume or your bank account or how confidently you speak in front of others. It's about how safe people feel around you, especially the ones you say you love. And by that measure, I was a failure. Her name was Amaka. She was my wife. And I destroyed her, not with fists alone, but with silence, neglect, and 1,000 tiny wounds she tried to bandage with hope. I didn't wake up one day and choose to become the man who made her shrink in fear. It was slower than that, like mold creeping in through the corners of a once pristine house. You don't notice it at first. You ignore the signs. Then one day, the ceiling collapses. And when it did, it wasn't just our marriage that broke. It was her. And eventually, it was me too. We met in Enugu. I was there visiting my aunt during a long holiday. She was working as a part-time assistant at a local bookstore, the kind you miss if you're walking too fast. I went in for directions and came out thinking about her smile. She had a way of looking at you like she saw through your words. Not in a creepy way, in a gentle, curious, sacred way. Her voice was quiet, but her eyes carried whole stories. We bumped into each other again the next day at a cafe nearby. She was seated alone, sketching in a worn notebook. I still remember how she looked that day. Simple blouse, denim skirt, afro puff held up by a wooden pin, and bare feet tucked under her seat. I don't know what made me sit beside her. Maybe it was the calm in her. Maybe it was the ache in me that I never knew I had. She looked up and smiled like she'd been expecting me. "I don't give out my number," she said after we talked for a while. "So, you're telling me there's no hope?" I joked. She smiled again. "I'm saying if it's real, we'll meet again." And we did. Our dating years were good, full of soft laughter, weekend walks, street food dinners, and long conversations about life. Amaka was always the dreamer. She wanted to open a center for young girls one day. A place where they're reminded of their worth every morning, she said. I loved her passion, her ideals, the fire in her voice when she talked about girls who had no one to protect them. I admired it. But deep down, I didn't really understand it. See, I grew up in a house where men roared and women obeyed. My father was the provider, yes, but he was also the punisher. He ruled with silence and strength, and no one ever questioned him. My mother, she endured, smiled in public, cried in private, and I swore I would never be like him. But I didn't realize how easy it is to inherit what you don't confront. We got married in December. It was a beautiful wedding, white and gold everything, her mother sobbing into her gel, my uncles drinking too much and making toasts. I remember looking at her during the ceremony and thinking, how did I get so lucky? She looked back at me with that same calm smile. If I had known what was ahead, I would have held her tighter that night. The beginning was sweet. She'd leave notes in my bag. Praying for your big meeting today, or don't forget to eat. She would wake early, even when she didn't have to, just to pack my lunch or iron my shirts. She'd pray for me every morning while I was still half asleep. Always gentle, always present. But I didn't notice how much of herself she was pouring out, because I wasn't pouring anything back in. I was busy. Work was stressful, the hours long, the partners demanding. When I came home, I just wanted quiet. I didn't want to talk about feelings or her day or what God had told her in prayer. I wanted silence. I wanted peace. And somehow, I thought she was the disruption. The first year, I started snapping more often. Over small things. If the rice wasn't hot, if the power went off and she forgot to charge my phone, if she called me more than once while I was at work, I'd raise my voice. Sometimes, I'd throw things. Never at her. Just near her. That way, I could convince myself it wasn't abuse. But the fear in her eyes said otherwise. She started walking on eggshells, asking me questions like she was begging, waiting for my mood to shift before speaking. She never accused me, never complained, but I could feel the love in her dimming. I blamed her. Why are you so sensitive? You're always acting like I'm the enemy. Stop making everything about feelings. She apologized. Every time. She'd cry softly at night, curled up with her back to me, and I'd pretend to sleep. It wasn't until she stopped crying altogether that I started to feel something was wrong. It happened on a Wednesday evening. I'd had a terrible day in court, lost a case I should have won. My boss embarrassed me in front of clients. I got stuck in traffic for 2 hours, and by the time I got home, I was boiling inside. I walked into the house, threw my briefcase on the couch, and barked, "Why is the generator not on?" Amaka came out of the kitchen with sweat lining her forehead. "The fuel finished this afternoon," she said, keeping her voice low. I tried to call the filling station, but their truck was... I cut her off. "Is it that hard to buy fuel? You're home all day." I was teaching a workshop in the church hall. "So your stupid workshop is more important than your husband?" She froze. I saw it. That little flicker of pain behind her eyes. But she didn't respond. She only turned and walked toward the kitchen. And that infuriated me more than anything. The way she didn't fight back. Like she'd given up. I followed her. Threw the kettle she was using across the floor. It clattered and spilled water everywhere. She turned slowly, chest rising, eyes steady. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "What did you say?" She repeated it, just a little louder. "Why are you doing this to me?" I don't know what snapped in me. I stepped forward and slapped her. Hard. It wasn't the first time my hand had flown out in anger, but this time it landed. And God help me. For one awful second I felt justified. She staggered back and held her cheek. But she didn't scream. She didn't run. She just looked at me. And through me. "You're becoming your father," she said softly. "And one day, you'll regret it, the way your mother regrets her silence." Then she turned and walked out of the room. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd felt before. For the next few days, she said little. She moved through the house like a ghost, her eyes empty, her voice distant. She stopped praying aloud in the morning. She no longer packed my lunch or left notes in my bag. At night, I'd turn toward her side of the bed, but she was always facing the other way. I'd reach out to touch her shoulder, and she would flinch. And still, I didn't apologize. Instead, I hardened. Blamed her again. "If you had just done your job, we wouldn't be here. If you weren't so difficult, I wouldn't get angry. If you think you can do better, go and try." She didn't respond to any of it, but I knew she was breaking, and I hated her for making me feel guilty. I twisted it all in my head. I told myself she was weak, ungrateful, manipulative. I told myself I was the victim. And one night, after another argument, one that started over something as small as her forgetting to iron my shirt, she locked herself in the bathroom. I heard her sobbing. I stood outside the door for a while. Then I walked away. The next morning, she told me she was pregnant. I wish I could say I jumped for joy. I wish I could say I kissed her and said we'd be okay. But I just stared at her. My heart pounded, but not from happiness, from panic. We're not ready for a child, I said flatly. She looked down. I know, but maybe this is the fresh start we need. I couldn't hide my coldness. I don't have time to raise a child right now. Do what you think is best. She nodded, then walked away. She didn't bring it up again, but I started noticing how she protected her belly when she walked, how she whispered to it when she thought I wasn't listening, how she prayed for it, loved it, hoped it would love her back. I felt nothing but resentment. And then one night, I came home drunk. It was raining, I was soaked, and the food she made had gone cold. I flipped. I cursed. She tried to warm it quietly, carefully, but I yanked the pot from the stove, flung it across the kitchen, and it shattered. She stepped back quickly. I moved forward, yelling. Do you think you're a saint? You think this baby will save our mess of a marriage? I don't think anything, she whispered. I just want peace. And you think peace is cold food? She reached for my arm, and I pushed her. It wasn't hard. I swear it wasn't hard. But she lost her balance. Her back hit the edge of the counter, and she dropped to the floor. Then she screamed, and I saw the blood. At the hospital, the doctor said we'd lost the baby. I sat in the hallway, numb, unable to cry, unable to pray. I couldn't even look at her when they wheeled her out. She wouldn't meet my eyes either. Her mother came to take her home for a while. She didn't come back for 3 weeks. When she did, she was different, colder, quieter, like a piece of her had been locked away forever. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She no longer dressed in the bright colors she loved. She wore headscarves all the time, stopped going to her fellowship, barely ate. The light in her was gone, and I had killed it. Then came Emeka. Emeka was my childhood friend. We met before puberty, bonded over football, broken fences, and sugarcane sticks sold by the old woman who cursed us every time we stole her wheelbarrow to race down the hill. He was the brother I never had, but we'd lost touch when he went to the UK for school and later stayed to work in tech. I hadn't seen him in almost a decade, until the day he knocked on my door unexpectedly. Tunde, he said, beaming as I opened it, you still have that proud face like you just won a court case. I laughed. I hadn't smiled that genuinely in weeks. We embraced. Amaka came out of the kitchen, startled by the noise. I remember the exact moment Emeka saw her. His smile softened. He looked at her like someone who had stumbled across a beautiful painting in a dusty attic. Hi, he said. I'm Emeka, your husband's bad influence from secondary school. Amaka smiled politely, her voice barely above a whisper. Nice to meet you. She didn't say more, just nodded and disappeared again. Emeka raised an eyebrow. She okay? I nodded quickly. She's tired. Work. He nodded, but he looked toward the hallway where she'd gone with a gaze that lingered longer than I liked. Over the next few weeks, Emeka came by more often. At first, I invited him myself. It was refreshing to have someone from my past who didn't demand anything from me. We drank together, talked about work, old classmates, Nigeria's failing systems, and all the things that used to make us laugh. But slowly, Emeka started arriving even when I hadn't called. He always brought something. Roasted fish, shawarma, mangoes, malt. And always, he'd ask Amaka, "How are you today?" Not just the passing kind of, "How are you?" but the kind that waits for a real answer. At first, she gave him the same responses she gave everyone else. I'm fine. I'm managing. God is faithful. But Emeka wasn't like most people. One afternoon, I walked in to find them sitting in the kitchen. Amaka was laughing. Not a full laugh. Not the kind she used to share with me, but the small, involuntary kind. The kind that escapes before the brain can stop it. She was smiling, and something in me tightened. Later that night, I confronted her. "So now you're suddenly friendly with Amika?" She blinked. "He's your friend. You barely talk to me, but you have full conversations with him now?" "I don't know what you want from me, Tunde," she said, her voice calm but tired. "I'm just trying to survive in this house." "Are you sleeping with him?" That stopped her. She stared at me, lips slightly parted, eyes full of a sadness I can't describe. "I'm not even alive enough to cheat," she whispered. "But if I was, you'd have no right to ask." I slapped her. Hard. Her head turned with the force, but she didn't fall. She didn't cry. She just turned back slowly and said, "You're going to destroy yourself, Tunde." Then she walked away. And I stood there, shaking, filled with rage, shame, and something deeper. Fear. Because I knew, in that moment, that I was losing her. Not just emotionally, but physically, spiritually, permanently. A week later, I came home and she was gone. No note. No suitcase. No goodbye. Just gone. Her clothes. Her books. Her journal. Even her photo from our wedding day. The one I thought she'd burned long ago. The silence in the house was suffocating. I called her phone. Switched off. Called her mother. No answer. Her sister. I haven't heard from her in months. I called Emeka straight to voicemail. I drove to his house like a madman. Knocked on his gate till my fists hurt. His security guard said, "Oga is not home." I sat in the car for hours, watching. I saw the lights come on. I saw her silhouette pass by the upstairs window. I saw her. She was there. Safe. Alive. And I wasn't the one keeping her that way. I returned home in a daze. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat for 3 days. The silence became my punishment. My sentence. My haunting. It wasn't just the absence of her voice, her presence, her scent. It was the absence of the possibility of redemption. For the first time, I understood what I had done. Not just the slaps. Not just the shouting. I had killed her spirit. Every time I dismissed her tears. Every time I invalidated her dreams. Every time I chose control over compassion. I had slowly carved away at the woman I had once promised to protect. And now she belonged to someone else. Not just physically, but in spirit, in peace, in healing, in joy. The house no longer felt like a home. The air was thick, not with heat, but with guilt. I stopped opening the blinds. I stopped turning on the TV. I couldn't bear the sound of laughter in any form. Not sitcoms, not commercials, not the neighbors' kids outside. Every room reminded me of her. The kitchen, where she once danced while frying plantain. The hallway, where her laughter used to echo when I tried to carry her on my back. The bedroom, now colder than a morgue. I couldn't sleep. At night, I'd reach out instinctively, forgetting she was gone. My hand would land on an empty mattress. The other side was always smooth, untouched. She'd made her absence neat, clean, as if she never wanted to leave behind a trace. I started drinking more. First, it was wine, then brandy, then whiskey, neat, like the silence that choked me. I didn't go to work for days. When I did, my performance tanked. Colleagues avoided my office. I was no longer the brilliant Tunde, defender of justice. I was the man whose wife vanished. When my boss called me in and said, "You either take time off or take a walk," I knew things had to change. So I did the last thing I ever thought I'd do. I called a therapist. Her name was Mrs. Folake. She was an older woman with graying dreadlocks, glasses that always slid down her nose, and a voice that felt like a church bell, calm but commanding. I sat in her office the first day, arms crossed, eyes down, body stiff. "Why are you here, Mr. Tunder?" she asked. I shrugged. "I need help getting back to work." She nodded. "What happened?" "My wife left me." "Why?" I paused. "She said I was hurting her." "And were you?" I said nothing. Her silence demanded more. "I didn't hit her. Not often," I finally said. Folake didn't flinch. "You don't have to hit someone often to damage them. Words wound, control suffocates, neglect can kill." I looked away. She leaned forward. "Do you believe you loved her?" I answered too fast. "Of course." "No," she said gently. "You believed you owned her." That hit me harder than any slap, because deep down, I knew she was right. Therapy became my confessional. Each week, I peeled off another layer of denial. I talked about my father, the way he yelled, the way my mother hid in corners. I talked about my obsession with control, my inability to express love without feeling weak. I cried. Often. Ugly, shaking sobs that made me feel like a child again. Sometimes I had to pause and just breathe. Other times, I would sit in silence for 20 minutes, unable to say her name. Amaka. Just saying it hurt. Folake told me healing would not mean forgetting. It would mean remembering, differently. One evening, I walked past a bookstore Amaka used to visit. On impulse, I went in. The place hadn't changed. Same creaky wooden floors. Same dusty light. I walked to the poetry section and picked up a collection she once read aloud on our anniversary. I opened to a random page. Sometimes the wound becomes the teacher, not because it was right, but because it refused to be ignored. I bought the book and took it home. That night, I read every page. And for the first time in 2 years, I didn't drink. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived at my door. No return address. Just my name. Handwritten in Amaka's unmistakable cursive. Inside was a wedding invitation. Amaka and Emeka. By the grace of God and the blessing of those who truly know love. I couldn't read the rest. My hands trembled. My chest burned. I wanted to scream, but I had no voice. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it for hours. Not because I was shocked she'd moved on, but because part of me thought she never would. And part of me hated how well he had done what I failed to do. Loved her. Truly. Gently. Completely. The wedding was a month away. I didn't go. But I wrote a letter. To Amaka, I never valued you. I see that now. Not just because you left, but because you survived me. I used to think love was provision. That if I paid bills, I was good. That if I didn't cheat too much, I was faithful. That if I only hit you once in a while, I wasn't an abuser. Now I know. Love is safety. Love is voice. Love is tenderness in the face of anger. I hope Emeka gives you all the things I killed in you. I hope your daughter never has to heal from the hands of a man like me. I hope you forgive yourself for staying so long. And if someday you ever find it in your heart to forgive me, not for my sake, but for yours, I'll be grateful. Be happy. Tunde. The letter was never sent. I wrote it 5 times, handwritten, typed. Email drafts I saved, but never finished. Something always stopped me. Not fear, not pride, but a quiet understanding that she no longer owed me closure. I had taken enough. Some things you write only to bleed the poison out. And once it's on paper, that's enough. Still, I kept the letter in the drawer next to my bed. Right beside her wedding ring, which she'd left on the table the night she disappeared. I never returned it. I couldn't. That small gold band became my relic, a reminder of what it once meant to be trusted with someone's entire life and how easily I broke that trust. The wedding passed. I saw the photos online. She looked radiant, not just beautiful, whole. Her dress was simple, elegant, hugging her gently like peace itself. Her smile was wide, teeth showing, eyes soft. She looked younger, lighter, like someone who had finally exhaled after years of holding her breath. Emeka looked at her the way I never did. His eyes weren't possessive, they were protective. He stood beside her like a man who knew what he had, and knew what it cost her to become this version of herself. I stared at the photos for hours. Then I cried. Not because I missed her, but because I finally understood what she had been asking of me all along. To love her without breaking her. Months passed. I quit my job at the law firm, moved to a smaller apartment, gave away the suits, the designer watches, the big man attitude. I kept only what I needed. I started volunteering at a center for men working through anger. Some were court-ordered. Some came because they had nowhere else to go. Some sat in the back, arms crossed, swearing they weren't those men. I knew them. I used to be them. I didn't speak for the first few sessions. Just listened. Heard stories that mirrored my own. The yelling, the silence, the slammed doors, the bruised wrists. But when I finally did speak, I didn't sugarcoat it. I'm not proud of what I did, I told them one evening. But I'll be damned if I pretend it didn't happen. I destroyed the woman who loved me the most. And it wasn't because I was a monster. It was because I was a coward. A coward who never learned how to sit with pain, so I passed it on. Some of them nodded. Others looked away. But one man cried, and after the session, he walked up to me and said, "My wife just left. She took our daughter. I came here to blame her. But now I think I see myself for the first time." That was the first time I felt like I had done something good in years. I started writing letters, not to Amaka, to myself, to my future son, if I ever had one, to the version of me that still lived in boys being told that anger is manhood, and silence is strength, and crying is weakness. I wrote about power, control, shame, and love. Real love. Not the kind that needs submission to survive, but the kind that makes space, that holds without hurting, that speaks truth, but always in kindness. And eventually, those letters became a book. It didn't sell much, but one copy made it to a woman's shelter. And one day, I got an anonymous message that simply said, "He read it. He's getting help. You saved my life." I cried again that night, because maybe, just maybe, some redemption can come even from ash. One afternoon, I was walking past a playground not far from my apartment. A little girl was skipping rope, laughing wildly. Her voice cut through the air like sunlight. A familiar laugh. I turned, and there she was, Amaka, holding the hand of a man I once called brother. Her belly was slightly rounded, pregnant again. This time, I prayed she was protected. Her eyes met mine for the briefest moment. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just nodded. The kind of nod that says, "I see you. I don't hate you. But I will never return." I nodded back, and I kept walking. Sometimes I still dream of her. Not as my wife. Not even as the woman I lost. But as the girl in the bookstore. Barefoot, sketching in her journal, full of light. Sometimes I try to speak to her in those dreams, but she just smiles, puts a finger to her lips, and returns to her drawing. And when I wake up, I lie still. Let the silence speak, and whisper, "Thank you for surviving me."